Good morning. Bonjour. Comment ça va? Bon dia. Como vai?
Hi everyone, welcome to our 25th Teachers Moot and 15th Graduates Reunion. Please give us a warm welcome and a round of applauses. This is Juliet Lorena Lopez.
And this is Jonathan Vasquez Guarnizo. Shout out to all of the audience here in situ, but also we really want to shout out people who are watching us on YouTube. Hi. We really want to give a shout out to all the members of the board of directors here in situ. Please let us welcome Doctora Yolanda Torres Pérez, directora de investigaciones. Doctor Adrián Freja de la Hoz, director del doctorado en lenguaje y cultura y la maestría en lingüística. Doctora Berta Ramos Holguín, directora de la maestría en docencia de idiomas. Profesora Sandra Silva Vivas, directora de la Escuela de Lenguas Modernas con énfasis en inglés, la sede Tunja y en la sede Agua Azul. Profesora María Imperio Arenas González, directora de la Escuela de Licenciatura en Lenguas Extranjeras con énfasis en inglés y en francés. Y el profesor César Romero Farfán, en representación de la Escuela de Literatura y Lengua Castellana. We really want to give warm welcome to all of the students and professors from our programs. The MA in Modern Languages with emphasis on English here in Tunja and in Agua Azul. The BA in Foreign Languages with emphasis on English and on French. And the BA in Literature and Spanish. Special greetings for all of the visitors, students and professors in the program, especially estudiantes de la licenciatura en lenguas modernas con énfasis en inglés de la sede Agua Azul. Plenary speakers and speakers from all the concurrent sessions, welcome.
If you are watching us from YouTube, please write in the comments where are you seeing us from. Now, I would like to ask you please to stand up to listen our anthems. De Colombia.
Now we really want to give the opportunity to Doctora Yolanda Torres Pérez, Directora de Investigaciones, to give a warm words.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning to everyone. Yes. Buenos días a todos y todas. Que se note ese entusiasmo. Bueno, les quiero saludar de parte de nuestro señor rector, el doctor Enrique Vera López, nuestros vicerrectores. Les envían un muy cordial saludo. Estamos muy orgullosos de este evento que precisamente cumple su 25ª versión. Estamos de gala el día de hoy y eso es gracias a ustedes, precisamente a todos los que han pasado y han hecho posible que este sueño que un día empezó hace 25 años ya hoy tenga esta edad. Queremos expresar un muy cordial saludo a mis compañeros de la mesa principal de nuestra universidad, obviamente también a todos nuestros compañeros que vienen y que también están viéndonos por medios, y un muy cordial saludo a nuestros invitados. Me comentan que tenemos invitados de la Universidad Surcolombiana, de la Universidad Estatal de Londrina, a la Universidad Nacional de Colombia y por supuesto a nuestros docentes y estudiantes de la UPTC, de nuestra casa. También quiero extender un cordial saludo a nuestros panelistas que vamos a tener a nivel internacional, nuestros ponentes de las sesiones paralelas que ustedes van a disfrutar, que nos van a acompañar de Estados Unidos, de Canadá y de México. Para la Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia es un placer estar en esta 25ª reunión de docentes y de graduados, que también fíjense que es un evento muy importante y vamos en la 15ª versión. Esto también es una muestra y este auditorio que está aquí afuera tratando de entrar es una muestra de ese sentido de pertenencia de ustedes hacia su programa. En realidad los felicito y este espacio es muy importante. ¿Por qué? Porque es un espacio en donde se reúnen docentes, estudiantes, graduados, comunidad académica, a interactuar, a intercambiar saberes, a intercambiar buenas prácticas y a reflexionar sobre algo tan importante como es el aprendizaje de segundos, terceros, cuartos idiomas. En este mundo en el que estamos tan dinámico, tan cambiante, tan competitivo, los idiomas son fundamentales. Así que los felicito, los que están en estos programas de pregrado y posgrado, porque ustedes van a tener un sello y un know-how muy relevante en este mundo competitivo en el que estamos. Invitarlos a que disfruten de estos 2 días de sesiones, de actividades, de intercambio de saberes, que donde yo les comento siempre en estos tipos de eventos, es importantísimo abrirse a la conversación, aprovechar y disfrutar de la visita de nuestros invitados que tienen tantos conocimientos y que se les agradece por estar aquí para compartirlos con ustedes. Entonces los invito precisamente a disfrutarlos. Espero que este espacio de intercambio de saberes y de experiencias los enriquezca, les ayude a fortalecer sus lazos y a crear nuevas relaciones, que en este ámbito cultural e intercultural es fundamental. Para mí es importante también mencionar que vamos a tener un prelanzamiento de libros de idiomas. Qué importante es también esa difusión del conocimiento. Entonces, no siendo más, por mi parte, felicitarlos, augurarles todos los éxitos del mundo en estas actividades que van a tener este día de hoy, el día de mañana, y esperar que sigamos con otros 25, 50 y 70 años más. Buenos días y disfruten.
Doctor Adrián Freja de la Hoz, director del doctorado en Lengua y Cultura y la maestría en Lingüística.
Bueno, muy buenos días. Es muy grato estar en esta 25ª versión del Teachers Moot, un evento que para la escuela, para la facultad y para la universidad representa una muestra del trabajo arduo de nuestros colegas, de nuestros docentes, de nuestros estudiantes y egresados en este ámbito de las lenguas extranjeras y en su relación también con el territorio, en su impacto también como ese diálogo intercultural que se da a propósito del lenguaje. Entonces es muy grato estar acá, les doy una calurosa bienvenida, muchas gracias de verdad por la invitación. El doctorado en lenguaje y cultura y la maestría en lingüística también aporta mucho y esperamos también a los egresados de las licenciaturas de lenguas modernas y lenguas extranjeras, énfasis inglés y francés, para que se inscriban también en nuestros programas y puedan aportar desde el estudio del lenguaje, desde las lenguas extranjeras a todas este impacto que podemos tener en el desarrollo de nuevo conocimiento a propósito del intercambio entre culturas y el intercambio a partir de las lenguas. Entonces, muchas gracias por la invitación y es un gusto estar acá. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a este 25º Teachers Moot.
Profesora Sandra Silva Vivas, directora de la Escuela de Lenguas Modernas con énfasis en inglés, de la sede de Tunja, Boyacá y Agua Azul, Casanare.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great honor to welcome you all to the 25th Teachers Moot and 15 Graduates Reunion. First, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Yolanda Torres Perez, Research Director, Dr. Adrián Freja de la Hoz, Academic Coordinator of the PhD in Language and Culture, Dr. Berta Ramos Holguín, Academic Coordinator of the MA in Language Teaching, Professor María Imperio Arenas González, Director of the Bachelor's Degree in Foreign Languages with an emphasis on English and French, Professor César Augusto Romero Farfán, Representative of the Bachelor's Degree on Literature and Spanish. I would also like to thank my dear colleagues and students from our 3 undergraduate programs, as well as those 50 participants joining us from our partner program in modern languages with an emphasis on English from Agua Azul campus. Where are they? Agua Azul, where is Agua Azul? Okay, excellent. Welcome. And to our in-person audience here today, and to those joining us live through YouTube, your presence makes this gathering even more meaningful. This annual academic event is a great chance for our university community to reflect on how applied linguistics impacts language teaching, learning, and professional development. We are especially honored to have distinguished speakers and presenters from Brazil, Canada, the United States, and Colombia, who enrich the academic and intercultural nature of this gathering. As the great writer and anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston once said, research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose. May this event be a true journey of learning, dialogue, and enrichment for each of us. Finally, my gratitude goes to the entire organizing team of the Teachers Moot, whose dedication has made this event possible. Welcome and thank you for being part of this community. Thanks.
Profesora María Imperio Arenas González, directora de la Escuela de Licenciatura en Lenguas Extranjeras con énfasis en inglés y en francés.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Don't worry, I'm not going to speak English. I'm here to share some words in French. Alors, Madame Bertha Ramos, directrice du master au master didactique des langues. Madame Yolanda Torres, directrice des affaires de recherche de l'université de UPTC. Voilà, sí, merci. Sí, es un poquito más. Madame Sandra Silva, directrice de l'école des langues modernes, spécialité en anglais. Monsieur César Romero, représentant de la directrice de l'école de littérature et langue castellane, Madame Doris Torres. Monsieur Farid Freja de Laos, directeur du doctorat en langage et culture de l'UPTC. ¿No me oyen? ¿No? Okay, más cerca, ok. Et moi, j'ai déjà été présentée, je suis la directrice de l'école des langues étrangères, spécialité en anglais et en français. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. C'est un vrai honneur de pouvoir participer à cet événement académique qui est né avec les changements du millénaire, avec l'arrivée du XXIe siècle. C'est ainsi que cette année, il fête ses 25 ans sous le nom de Teachers Moot et les 15 ans des étudiants du master en didactique de langue. L'équivalent en français de Teachers Moot pourrait être les débats des professeurs. Et l'équivalent, c'est assez spécial. On est là, réunis, pour connaître ce que d'autres personnes, apprenants et enseignants, ont fait, découvert, analysé, exploré, enrichi et partagé. Il s'agit d'une rencontre académique annuelle dont l'objectif est celui de réunir des membres de notre communauté universitaire pour réfléchir sur des sujets liés à la linguistique appliquée et son impact sur l'enseignement et l'apprentissage des langues, ainsi que le développement professionnel des enseignants. Dans cette occasion, nous avons la participation des panélistes de renom, originaires du Brésil, du Canada, des États-Unis, du Mexique et évidemment de la Colombie. En plus, on a la présence de plus de 50 apprenants et enseignants du siège de l'UPTC à Aguasul, ce qui enrichit encore plus le caractère académique et interculturel de la rencontre. Soyez les bienvenus et profitez au maximum de ces 2 journées académiques autour du plaisir d'apprendre, de parler en plusieurs langues et de partager des savoirs et des expériences d'autrui. Merci beaucoup et soyez les bienvenus.
Profesor César Romero Farfán, en representación de la Escuela de Literatura y Lengua Castellana.
Muy buenos días. Un saludo entrañable y muy cordial para quienes nos acompañan en el día de hoy. En especial presento un saludo a mis colegas de la mesa directiva y les agradezco su presencia y la invitación a este maravilloso evento. De igual forma, saludo a nuestros queridos estudiantes y colegas de las licenciaturas en Lenguas Modernas con énfasis en inglés, sedes Tunja y Agua Azul, de la licenciatura en Lenguas Extranjeras con énfasis en inglés y en francés, y de la licenciatura en Literatura y Lengua Castellana. Presento un saludo muy cordial, efusivo y muy respetuoso de nuestra directora, la doctora Dorililia Torres Cruz, quien ha enviado para este evento unas palabras especiales que posteriormente ustedes escucharán. Qué afortunados somos, porque definitivamente el objeto de estudio de la lingüística, nuestra ciencia nutricia, es el lenguaje, es la lengua, es el habla, es el dialecto, es el idiolecto, es el ideolecto, y en definitiva ellos nos hacen ser, nos hacen hacer, nos hacen sentir y nos hacen conocer. Tarea tan maravillosa que precisamente nos posibilita el lenguaje. Y aquí nos culmina precisamente en este entrañable y trascendental Teachers Moot la reflexión. Primero sobre aforismos de la lingüística teórica, pero también aforismos de la lingüística aplicada. La reflexión sobre nuestra manera de enseñar y de aprender, en especial las lenguas, pero con ellas conexos y yuxtapuestos los conocimientos que las mismas entrañan. Haremos entonces reflexiones muy importantes sobre la lingüística de la lengua y sobre la lingüística del lenguaje. y nos conectaremos no solamente con la gramática, la sintaxis, la morfología, sino también con la cultura, con el pensamiento crítico, con la crítica y con tres elementos fundamentales que se debatirán, se discutirán, se consensuarán en estos 2 días. La lengua como objeto, la lengua como instrumento y la lengua como dimensión, que en suma nos hacen a nosotros, hombres y mujeres, personas encargadas y personas prestas para no solamente construir conocimiento, sino también para poderlo parafrasear. Hermosa oportunidad esta en la que agradecemos a nuestra maestría en docencia de idiomas, a su directora, a su comité de currículo por esta organización tan impecable y tan especial que año tras año nos ha permitido, sin duda alguna, mejorar un compromiso fundamental que no podemos olvidar. En nuestro caso, la formación de excelentes profesoras y profesores de lengua extranjera y de lengua materna. Y para nuestros exalumnos, llevar esa formación muy en alto, con un altísimo criterio pedagógico y con un bagaje y un acervo que nos distingue como UPTCistas, formadores de formadores. Muchas gracias por esta cordial invitación, muy gentiles, y disfrutemos estos 2 días de reflexiones lingüísticas, de reflexiones sobre el lenguaje, sobre la lengua y sobre el habla. Muchas gracias.
Doctora Berta Ramos Holguín, directora de la maestría en docencia de idiomas.
Dr. Yolanda Torres Pérez, Director of Research, Professor Dr. Adrián Freja de la Voz, Coordinator of the PhD Program in Language and Culture, Professor Sandra Silva Vivas, Director of the School of Modern Languages with emphasis on English, Professor María Imperio Arenas, Doctor of the School of Foreign Languages with an emphasis on English and French, Professor César Romero Farfán, on behalf of the Director of the Escuela de Licenciatura en Literatura y Lengua Castellana, Dr. Doris Lilia Torres. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a pleasure for all of us, and especially for me, to welcome you all to this event. I hope you're doing well and are as excited as we are to begin this special event and moment right now. On behalf of the Curricular Committee of the MA in Language Teaching, I am honored to welcome each one and every one of you to the 25th Teachers Moot and the 15th MA in Language Teaching Graduates Reunion. This event is a valuable opportunity to share and reflect on diverse pedagogical and research experiences within the field of language education. Before we begin, I would like to express our heartfelt appreciation to the members of the Curricular Committee, Professors Sonia Rojas, Yorani Romero, Ilva Janet Rodriguez, Julián Martínez, and Sonia Méndez, our assistant, because they are always there helping us, and they have dedicated a lot of time to organize this event. A special thank you as well to our organizers, our semilleros de investigación, and all the students who have helped us to organize the event. We are also deeply grateful to our MA students, professors, and undergraduate students from the School of Modern Languages with emphasis on English and the School of Foreign Languages with emphasis on English and French at the UPTC, whose support has been essential to the success of this event. This year, we are honored to host several distinguished experts in the field of English language teaching and research. So I would like to welcome Dr. Diego Fernando Macías from Universidad Sur Colombiana, Dr. Aida Elizabeth Blanco Estupiñán from Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia, Dr. Telma Jiménez from Universidad Estadual de Londrina in Brazil, Professor Silva Janet Rodríguez Tamayo and Jair Aguirre Morales from Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia, Profesor Miguel Arcángel Rojas García from Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia, Profesor José David Largo Rodríguez from Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Professors Yorani Marcela Romero and Nancy Esperanza Barón from Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia. We are excited to share their insights and experiences in language teaching and research. In addition to our plenary speakers, we invite all the participants to join our concurrent sessions, which will begin at 4 p.m. These sessions will provide further opportunities to engage, exchange ideas, and explore emerging perspectives in the field. Finally, I would like to extend our thanks to our plenary speakers, our sponsors, including Cultural Care Au Pair and Amity Program, and of course, to you, to all of you, our valuable audience. Thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate that. I would also like to invite you all to give a big round of applause to our wonderful students who have been traveling since 2 a.m. in the morning because they are coming from Agua Azul, Casanare. So, welcome. So welcome to you. This is your program, this is your university, and the MA in Language Teaching is also your home. So please feel free to come anytime to grasp up a cup of coffee and to enjoy your time with us here in Tunja. I know it's a little bit cold, but we are not that cold. So you're going to have a very good time sharing these 2 days with us. So thank you to all of you, and as part of the curricular committee, we wish you a rewarding and inspiring experience at this year's Teachers Moot and MA Graduates Reunion. So let's start. Thank you very much.
All right. So before starting our plenaries, I would like to give you a couple of reminders. The first one is regarding the timetable. Our event will be held today from 9 a.m. to noon, then in the afternoon, from 2 to 6 p.m., and tomorrow, Saturday, from 9 a.m. to noon. If you don't have a bag, you can get it at the entrance or at the MAs. Also, there is a QR code in case you need to check the program. Our plenaries will be held in person and also virtually. When developing in person, they will be held at the Paraninfo Auditorium, where we are at right now, and also at the rooms from our programs in the second floor of RC building. If you need any help, our ushers are wearing black vests, so please just ask them. And regarding the certificates from your participation in this event, they will be sent to your emails in the next couple of weeks. But please, if you don't get them, reach out to the Masters in Language Teaching. Finally, our snacks. You have 3 tickets in your name tags, so please use each. The first one would be in the morning, will be given here in the morning at this auditorium, but we will please ask you to not eat inside the auditorium throughout all the sessions.
All right, can I please have a round of applause so we can say goodbye to our distinguished board of directors here? How about if we start? Are we ready? I don't think we're ready. Are we ready? All right, let's welcome Professor Diego Fernando Macías, please. Listo. Professor Diego Fernando Macías holds a bachelor degree in modern languages, Universidad Sur Colombiana, and an MA degree in English, Governors State University in Chicago, Illinois, and an MA degree in TESOL, University of Brighton in the UK, and a PhD in second language acquisition and teaching from University of Arizona, Tucson. And today we're honored to have him here with his plenary entitled Whose English Counts? Rethinking Teacher Education in the Age of Global Englishes Language Teaching. Can I please have a round of applause for him?
I think it's fine. I think it's fine. Yeah, I think it's fine. Yes. So right here is fine. Can everyone hear me? Yes, perfect. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see such a large crowd, and it's intimidating as well, as you can imagine. You know? So it's my honor, my pleasure to be here at UPTC. First time at UPTC. Can you believe this? You know? Last time I visited Tunja was when I was 17. So it seems like yesterday. So but I didn't get the chance to visit UPTC at that time when I was 17. So and look at me now. I am in my, how shall I put it? Late 40s, very, very, very early 50s. And here I am. So I'm happy to be here with you. So thank you for the invitation. I want to thank the organizing committee for inviting me, Professors Berta Ramos, Professor John Mosquera, who made initial contact with me and who asked me to join you in this event. So I'm very, very excited, very happy to be here with you. And I'll be sharing with you some of my, kind of part of my experiences as derived from my engagement with a topic that I feel that it's very close to my heart, and it's and I think it's also relevant, and I think it's of the utmost importance for the field of teacher education, for the field of language teaching and teacher education. And I hope it is of interest to you as well as prospective teachers. And I understand that we have current students here and also alumni of the different of the two undergraduate programs that you guys have here at UPTC. So I welcome everyone. I also welcome staff, faculty, professors, colleagues from different universities, and obviously from UPTC. I'll start with I just don't want to make sure that I don't want to lose track of time, so I often get overexcited about this topic and then I lose track of time. So let me just restart this timer now. I'll start with a couple of anecdotes, sort of like to set the scene, maybe, and at the same time give you a little bit of background, some details about my initial encounters with the topic of global Englishes, language teaching, and as we will see later in my presentation, that acronym of GELT, or Global Englishes Language Teaching, it embraces or it captures different acronyms and abbreviations that you guys may have heard before. So acronyms like English is a global language, English is a lingua franca, English is an international language, world Englishes, translanguaging, English is a multilingua franca, so there's a whole bunch of concepts and ideas. And one thing to bear in mind at this time is that GELT, or Global English Language Teaching, embraces these constructs and these ideas, as we will see throughout my presentation. So think of that as some sort of like a disclaimer, if you like. A couple of anecdotes to begin with. It must have been 2009, 2010. I got a scholarship, a Hornby Trust scholarship through the British Council to go to the UK to do a master's degree. I went to the University of Brighton, so I found myself, I was my first time in the UK, and I found myself surrounded by many international students. So my classmates were 90% of them there was only one guy from there, a local student, if I can put it like that. He wasn't actually from the UK, but he wasn't actually from London or from Great Britain, but he was from Scotland. But the rest of us, we were all international students. So I had classmates from places like South Korea, from Nigeria, from Taiwan, from Poland, from Czech Republic. And it was my first encounter, so I was coming from Huila, from Colombia, of course, and it was not my first time abroad, but it was my first time in the UK, and then I found myself interacting with these people, and I have to admit it that I had a hard time trying to understand some of them, and I bet that they had a hard time trying to understand me as well. And so I felt that I was ill-prepared to deal with that, because I had been taught in my undergraduate program that I was learning English to interact with native speakers of English. That's what I was taught. And I was prepared, and I was exposed to pretty much, as maybe many of us, pretty much exposed to American English. So I never heard anybody else, anybody from India or Pakistan or from Saudi Arabia or from Nigeria speaking English. No, I had never experienced that. So you can relate to that. So I had to struggle with that. So the concept of communicative burden came into play right there, because we had to negotiate meanings, and forms, and then I had to ask them to repeat the same thing like 3 or 4 times, keeping my fingers crossed, hoping that they would not feel offended by that if I asked them again to repeat the same thing 2 or 3 times, because I did not get what they were saying, and then they experienced something similar. On top of that, I ended up living in a dorm, in a university dorm, and it was this 5-room apartment, so we shared the common areas of the kitchen and the living room, but we all have our own rooms. And there was this girl from Russia, somebody else from Taiwan, 2 guys from Nigeria, and somebody else from a different from a different country. So, and it was the same thing. So whenever I ended up in the kitchen, and I saw these 2 flatmates, having a conversation, these 2 guys from Nigeria, and I wasn't aware that was English. I couldn't catch that. And so I realized right there that it was a different kind of English. And it would not be easy for me to follow through that. That's one anecdote. So that tells you a little bit about my first encounter with world Englishes, or with varieties of English. I hope you can relate to that. Then another anecdote, I heard this from one of my students, one of my former students in the past. She was very excited about going to the US for the first time. Must have been a few years ago. Took a plane, she ended up in New York City, so she came out of the airport, and she was very excited, about having a conversation with native speakers in English, sort of like, okay, this is the real scenario, so I'm going to practice my English. This is what she had in mind. I'll be practicing my English, So the number one expectation about going to the US, and again, meeting people people you can interact with in English, so that you can put into practice what you have learned in your undergraduate program here at UPTC. In her case, it was obviously there at Universidad Surcolombiana in Neiva. Arrived at the airport, like I said, so she took a taxi, and then to realize that the taxi driver was from Sri Lanka. He was just like her, a non-native speaker of English. And she found herself there interacting with a taxi driver who happened to be from Sri Lanka. Got to the hotel, found that the receptionist was from China. So she found herself interacting with this person in English, of course, trying to get meaning across and trying to understand what the receptionist was telling her. So, and that was, again, another moment of realization. So that was another aha moment for her, just like, like the experience that I had. And then a third anecdote. This is something that I heard from David Crystal. David Crystal is the chief editor of the British Encyclopedia, a native speaker of English. And then he talks about this. He shares this anecdote in one of the interviews, in one of his interviews. And he talks about the first time he visited South Africa. So he went to South Africa, he arrived there, so British Council driver, so the British Council sent him a driver, so the driver took him around, and then he was there, obviously, in the car with the driver designated by the British Council in South Africa. And then he saw a sign, he tells in the interview that he saw a sign on the road that says, "Robot ahead." And so he couldn't help thinking about that. So he decided to ask the taxi driver. And then the driver, it wasn't a taxi, but the driver. So the driver replied saying, "Yes, of course," in South African accent, saying something like, "Yes, there's a robot ahead. Don't you know? There's a robot ahead." And so he found himself in that position of trying to figure out what they meant by robot. And then the driver insisted, "Yes, it's like 3 robots ahead. We have to make a left, or we have to make a right. 3 robots ahead." And he couldn't figure it out. So he had to ask again. He insisted on that. Does anybody know what robot means in South African English? There you go. Robot is a traffic light in South African English. And that reveals a little bit of, of varieties of English and how English is being used in so many ways across the world. And I think it's the result of people taking ownership of it. So people in different corners of the world, they take ownership of English. They make it their own. And when they make it their own, they change it. So as English spreads across the world, it shifts, it changes as well. As it enters, as it makes contact with local languages and local cultures and local traditions, it is transformed, and it is being constantly transformed. So we can no longer talk about maybe a few decades ago we were asked if we spoke American or British English. So we narrow everything down to those two. So it was just American or British. And are you learning American or British English? So whenever a friend of yours told you something like, I'm taking an English course here and there, and then the next question would be, is it American or British English? And if you guys remember, the course books or the textbooks that we use, they pretty much contain clear references to either American or British English. Distinctive icons of these dominant cultures. And if we play those listening exercises in those course books, what did we hear? What did we hear? We heard, obviously, native speakers of English, primarily from the US or the UK. And if we heard somebody else from a different country, so we thought of that person as wrong, or we thought of that accent as wrong, there's something wrong with it. Can we go to the next one, please? I put together this quiz. You might want to give it a try. Maybe you might want to entertain yourselves with it for a couple of minutes, if you like. It won't be graded, okay? I won't grade your results. But you can check your results at the end if you like, Just give it a try. It won't take more than maybe 1 or 2 minutes. And then in the meantime, I will proceed with my talk. But again, try to focus on one. Focus on the answers obviously provided there, or that you will provide there, and then what I'll be telling you. So the purpose is for you to get a taste or to get a sense of this idea of world English is, and English is a lingua franca. So it's like putting your knowledge to the test, putting what you know to the test, so that you can get a sense. You know, that's the whole purpose. So, did everyone grab it? Shall we move to the next slide? Okay, all right. You should be able to see your own results anyways and see how well you did. Next, please. This is part of the same issue that I referred to earlier or in my previous comments. So a new vision of English will evolve into a new way of teaching it. So if we realize and if we become aware of the status of English around the world today, then we also need to realize that there has to be another way of teaching it, or that will involve another way of teaching. So that is, the new or the current status of English in the world today demands a new way of teaching it. So there are implications for the ELT field, for the field of English language teaching. Implications derived from those transformations and changes, again, that English is currently going through. And all this, you may be wondering, why is that happening today? So why didn't that happen again 20, 30 years ago? But it's happening today because of these implications derived from the phenomenon of globalization. It's easier today than in the past to travel abroad, to travel internationally, for example. It's a lot cheaper maybe compared to what it cost, in the past. So aspects like, or circumstances connected to international mobility, international tourism, migration, displacement, tourism. So all these elements of what is happening around the world, the fact that international mobility, students traveling around the world, for various reasons, for different reasons. All these elements, all these aspects have in one way or another exacerbated the spread of English, because it's easier for us to make contact. I always tell my students, like, if they think that they're traveling, if they think that they're learning English because they only want to interact with native speakers of English, so, I often tell them, good luck with that. You may not easily find them, because for every 4 or 5 of us that is non-native speakers of English, there is one native speaker of English. So native speakers of English are clearly outnumbered by us, by non-native speakers of English. I heard the other day that there are more people learning English in China alone than native speakers of English in the entire world. So if you put together, again, the number of native speakers of English, if you put them together, that number is going to be smaller than the number of people learning English only in China. So, and you can tell Chinese English, and along with it, Chinglish, is expected to take a significant role in the upcoming years. It's not the Chinese, it's the Chinese speaking English. So, and I agree with with several scholars, Jenkins, Seidelhofer, the same Crystal, who believe that in the near future, English seems to be a dominant global language or a dominant lingua franca. That's it's very unlikely to see something different within the next, in the near future. In a more distant future, it would be a lot more difficult to anticipate. But you guys remember again, you can maybe ask your grandparents, maybe for most of you, and then they'll tell you that there was a time when they were learning Greek and Latin in schools. And it's it's clearly because these two languages dominated at that time. But who knows what's going to happen beyond or after our lifetime. So non-native speakers of English, this is another consequence of that. Non-native English-speaking teachers have been accustomed to carrying out their professional duties with a feeling of inferiority or inauthenticity. And we heard this, you may have heard about the Stockholm Syndrome or the impostor syndrome. Barnett talks about that. And it's the idea that we're teaching a language that doesn't belong to us. And if it doesn't belong to us, I feel that I am an imposter, that I am borrowing a language and trying to teach a language that doesn't belong to me. And that's not the way that it should be, not at present. Maybe that was the way that things used to be back in the 1960s, 70s, maybe 80s. But that should not be the way. A process of empowerment is needed, is required. And then this requires the development of awareness of the global spread of English so that teachers can become more active agents of change. If your students, you guys are teachers or pre-service teachers, you will be, or prospective teachers, so you will eventually be in-service teachers. And you don't want your students to walk away with the idea that it's just American or British English. And you don't want your students to walk away with the idea that they will only be interacting in English with people from the US or from the UK or with native speakers from any of these two countries. It happens internationally and intranationally. You will see in one of the studies that I will report later what we found in that regard. And I think it's an interesting point of maybe an interesting turning point, so something that we might want to reflect on. GLT, or Global English Language Teaching, where teachers develop a vision, so those teachers who are aware of GELT, or Global English Language Teaching, so they tend to develop a vision that will affect their attitude to the language on the one hand, and their attitude to the way that they should teach the language on the other hand. So it affects both. They have to develop a vision that is likely to affect both how I see English nowadays, the language, and how I am going to teach that language to my students. Next, please. Why this matters? Well, you can tell. These are some of the reasons. GELT awareness can lead to improved tolerance for diverse English varieties with a focus on intelligibility rather than native-like competence or native-like accuracy. There's also the idea of incorporating GELT principles. Incorporating those principles to empower teachers so that they can think of teaching methodologies that better respond to local needs. There are different models. I mentioned Dogan, Kayak, Tuna, and Harman as one of them, but Mokanu, Lurda, and Mokanu, they present another model. Models that emphasize integrating theory and practice. They also emphasize the need to deconstruct the concept of the native speaker. And then this idea of attitudinal readjustment. So we need to readjust our attitudes to the language and to the way of teaching the language in response to the new status of English in the world today. GELT or ELF aware teacher education, so needs to go beyond awareness. I agree with those scholars who think that it all begins with awareness raising And that's it. That is part of what I've been doing, and as you will learn soon. But then it's just the starting point. So we have to move into practical integration, into designing materials, into considering, obviously, the designing of courses and how the courses we design, they have to be imbued with these elements of English as an international lingua franca, and the need to move away from prioritizing British American proficiency standards and then to recognizing variation. If we do not do that, again, students they may show disrespect whenever they encounter a variety that is going to be different from American or British, and they will see them as inferior, and that will affect international understanding. Next, please. Some ideas, some references to previous sources or previous studies, what they have found. A gradual transition to GELD frameworks that constitutes a relevant goal. In the Colombian context, I have been in contact with Professor Adriana Gonzalez, and I know that she's been working on this same topic. Professor Mora as well. An increased intercultural understanding and a greater sense of awareness is something that we need to develop. A need to incorporate principles of a world English pedagogy into teachers' lessons, and it's not easy, and that's a challenge. And maybe I'll make a quick reference to that later when it comes to the use of AI. In that regard. So how can we use artificial intelligence in that sense? Attachment to the monolingual ideology remains pretty strong. Yes, it's not easy. And most people, I'm talking about ordinary people outside who are interested in learning English, so who are not obviously into the field of English language teaching. They're not teachers, they're just common people, ordinary people. So for them, they tend to, they hold on to that idea of the native speaker. I'm talking about the parent who says, I want to send my kids to learn English in that language institute because in that language institute they have native speakers of English. Situations that we often experience. Or I will send my kids to study English abroad because they will learn the English, with native speakers. This is very ironic. One of my peers or one of my classmates in the UK, that's what she did. She taught English in a private language school in Brighton. She was from Poland, clearly a non-native speaker of English. But the students they never figured it out. Not until she told them. Then she told them, and they went and they complained with the school director. They asked her to change her. She was telling us, this was a group of students coming from Germany, a group of PhD students in the area of linguistics. Can you believe this? I know it's hard to believe, but I'm telling you the truth. Yes. A reorientation of participants' convictions led to increase their self-confidence. This is what we can gain. They did not see in the study by Sifakis and Bayur, they did not see ELF and EFL as mutually exclusive, but then they found a way to complement these two. Next, please. This is something that I mentioned earlier. So this idea of GELD being some sort of amalgam, it covers or it captures so many of these constructs that I mentioned earlier. So this is so that you can have this in the back of your minds. And that was an interesting, that the table 1 shows an interesting contrast. This was established by Galloway and Galloway and Rose. They point out, as you can see, the differences between traditional ELT and GELD and what each one emphasizes. All right, next I'll be I have like 15 minutes left, and I have to, can we move to the next one, please? I want to quickly share with you some broad details of 2 research studies that we have conducted. I have conducted those with Professor John Eduardo Mosquera, who happens to be obviously, yeah, I got 15 minutes left. Yeah, thank you, John, for the reminder. So 2 research experiences in the context of the teacher education program at Universidad Surconomena, which is obviously very similar to the undergraduate programs you have here. Okay, next. So I'll be very quick, I promise that. Project 1, this is what we did. It was aimed to examining the effects of raising awareness among a group of pre-service teachers, just like some of you guys, around varieties of English through a series of student-led presentations in the context of a course in an undergraduate language teacher education program. So whenever I say language teacher education program, I think of something like licenciatura en lenguas extranjeras in a public university in Colombia. That's what we did. We worked with, that happened in the context of globalization and language teaching. That was a course. It was just a course in the program, in the undergraduate program. That happened in 2023 first semester. Participants, final year students in the program, at B2 level on the Common European Framework. Then, next one, please. Tools of the trade. So that is how we gather data, or what we did. We asked students to deliver presentations on a variety of English. So students were asked to investigate a particular variety of English. So we asked them to, for example, investigate about history, status, accent, grammar, pronunciation features, loan words, attitudes of English in that variety or in that country, interaction patterns, and audio or video recordings. So we asked them to, in small groups, to prepare a presentation and to deliver that presentation in the classroom. That was the strategy. That's what we asked them to do. We gathered data through a reflection log, as you can see, and student report. And then we conducted an interview, a semi-structured interview, and the purpose, again, was to gather their perceptions of the status of English in the world, the potential gains of being exposed to varieties of English, and obviously we wanted them to tell us about how the presentation strategy contributed to their understanding of world Englishes and English as a lingua franca. Next one, please. I know it's hard to read, but can we try to zoom in? So these are like the three dominant. I'm going to do this if it is okay with everyone. I think I feel better now. Yes. Okay. So those are like the 3 dominant themes or 3 dominant categories we found, so that you can get a sense. So students claim that they had developed new perspectives and understandings. As I'm not going to read the quotes, but you can go ahead and do that if you like. So I included those quotes, or those 2 quotes, as examples of what they said, of what students, like most of you guys, said in the context of this research study. They also talked about positioning themselves as equally skilled users of English, as that quote, or as those 2 quotes seem to reveal. So these were our participants' own words. And then they also claimed that the presentation strategy that we had used had contributed to their professional development. And then maybe they can see maybe one of the quotes, if you can zoom in. Okay? So you can get a sense. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can get an idea of what they said as a result of implementing the presentation strategy, student-led presentation strategies. They did all the work. They did all the work. They went and they learned about this variety, like South African English, Indian English, Chinese English, German English. And as they did that, they encountered words like Chinglish or Gerglish, you know. And so they found that in a way very meaningful. Okay, so next, please. So this is what we, can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, and this is what we concluded in the context of that study. Some ideas, of course, you know. There needs to be, or there is a willingness to, or a disposition to revise prior understandings and beliefs associated with dominant English varieties, and a new perspective of English as an international lingua franca. And these were consistent with previous studies by Sifakis and Bayur and Eitz et al. The presentations and the follow-up discussions, these offer participants practical and theoretical insights to better understand the concept of global ownership of English. And then the presentation strategy increased participants' awareness towards the use of English globally, strengthened their identity and sense of confidence as legitimate users of English. These findings, these seem contrary to previous studies by Christopher et al. And Groom, which have reported participants' strong attachment to the native speaker model even after being exposed to GELD-oriented practices. Okay, the second project, next one please. This is the second project. We conducted this one with John as well. The previous one was published in TESOL Journal. So if you let me know if you want to get a copy of the article, of the full text article, if you want to read the whole thing. And then this one is being considered for publication. We got the message that it may be accepted for publication. It requires minor revisions, so we're going to be working on that pretty soon. Project 2, teachers. So those were the two questions, the two sort of like driving questions. What are teacher educators? And pre-service teachers' sense of awareness of the phenomenon of English as a lingua franca, and what are some implications as revealed by the two groups of participants associated with an eventual incorporation of English as a lingua franca, an eventual incorporation of English as a lingua franca in an English teacher education program at this university. So the two types of participants. Okay, next please. I'll skip this one. So it tells you simply that we were with 12 teacher educators and 15 pre-service teachers in the same program. So you can get a sense of their background. Then we selected, or we worked with a smaller sample of 7 teacher educators and 7 pre-service teachers, and these were invited for an interview. So we rely on a questionnaire, and then on a semi-structured interview, and we also relied on thematic analysis. Moving on to what we found. This is what we found. Next, please. Understanding ELF from various yet convergent perspectives, as you can see. So these are also quotes so that you can get an idea. But interestingly, notice that they say, one of the participants said something like, the use of English by speakers of other languages in an English-speaking country. So it is almost as if the use of ELF is exclusively connected to an English-speaking country. So losing sight of the fact that it happens everywhere. So there is no geographic location that is connected to ELF or GELD. No, it's everywhere you go. And even here in our own country. And also the idea of a means of communication between people who do not have English as their first language. And that has also been debunked because native speakers can also take part of ELF interaction. So that is, the moment I enter a conversation with a native speaker of English, so that may constitute an example of ELF, a native versus with a non-native speaker of English. Particular attributes of ELF, this is something that they highlighted as well. You can once again get a sense, get an idea. acknowledge the relevance of ELF. This is what our participants declared or claimed. So ELF as a means to promote broader intercultural understanding, awareness of different English accents, and so on. Next, please. They also highlighted, in the context of this study, they highlighted the need to break away from a dominant orthodoxy. So breaking away from the dominant orthodoxy, that dominant orthodoxy meaning the orthodoxy that is based on native speakerism and standard English ideologies. And then finally, a readjustment of materials and teaching approaches. So they thought that in an eventual implementation of ELF, in the context of an English teacher education program, then we would have to experience, or we would have to go through readjusting materials, course books, of course, and again, the approaches that we used. And where does this, next one please, where does this leave us? There is a need for growing awareness of features, once again, connected to GELD and ELF, and this should remain a permanent concern or a constant concern for language teacher education. Acknowledgement of GELD requires a paradigm shift. We have to shift our paradigms and our ways and understandings when it comes to English in the world today. A more inclusive model that reflects the global nature of English today. The insertion of strategies like the ones that I shared with you about the use of the presentation strategy. So that may constitute one. Strategies meant to increase awareness of global Englishes. These constitute clear examples of pre-service teachers' gradual adoption of GELD and ELF. And it's not going to happen overnight. And you may find your student who's going to say, well, no, what's wrong? What if I want to pursue American English because I like American English? That's not a crime. No, it's not a crime. It will be your choice, and it will be your student's choice. It's everyone's choice. Yes, that's clear. But the fact that it is everyone's choice doesn't mean that they don't need to be aware of the existence of other different varieties and how they should relate to those other varieties and how they show tolerance to those other varieties. Some implications. Next one, please. 2 to go. Okay. 2 minutes and 2 slides. There's a need to design. A need to design and implement materials, approaches, and policies. It should not be, this implementation should not be like top down, but it should be, again, via curricular innovation, and this should be the result of people in the program working together. So that is teachers and faculty and teacher educators, of course, and pre-service teachers. Interestingly, a lack of GELD materials was strongly correlated with attachment to the standard English and the monolingual ideology. So that is, many students or many teachers decide to revert to that because there are no materials. If there are no materials and resources in the context of GELD, so what shall we do? Go back to, traditional ELT. So that is teaching English again, prioritizing British and American proficiency and standard English ideologies. Specific features of different varieties of English should be made available. So we should obviously try to include elements. There is an interesting website called International Archive of English Accents or English Dialects. You should check that website. It offers you some interesting resources. ELT scholars are encouraged to look into how awareness-raising initiatives inform prospective teachers' selection of teaching methods and approaches. That is something to explore, further explore as well. And finally, it will be relevant to investigate how deep-seated beliefs on native speakerism and standard English ideologies affect curriculum design, teacher attitudes, and student expectations and strategies to overcome, and we got to think of strategies to overcome such constraints. And I'll finish up with this quote. Next one, please. I leave it there for you. This is Henry Widowsond, but I believe it captures, part of the essence of what of the role of GELD nowadays. So thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to take questions. Well, I don't know. We may not have time now, but okay, no time for questions now. But I'll be happy to take questions later on during this during the event. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, respected professor. We're gonna continue with our plenaries. So the next one. Va a ser una plenaria en español. Nuestra segunda plenaria presencial está intitulada Escritoras Ténebra, Antología de Cuentos Oscuros, desarrollada por la profesora Aida Elizabeth Blanco Estupiñán de la Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia. Aida Elizabeth Blanco Estupiñán, doctora en Letras por la Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais, magíster en Literatura y licenciada en Idiomas Modernos por la Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia. Desarrolló una estancia postdoctoral centrada en el análisis del poder en la narrativa de Margaret Atwood, investigadora reconocida por el Ministerio de Ciencia, Tecnología e Investigación. Su trayectoria académica y profesional se ha desarrollado en los campos de la docencia universitaria, la investigación interdisciplinaria y la formación de docentes. Sus líneas de trabajo incluyen la literatura comparada, los estudios literarios, la crítica feminista y la didáctica de la literatura. Ha sido docente en instituciones de educación superior en Colombia y Brasil, miembro de grupos de investigación, editora y evaluadora de revistas científicas. Se desempeña como docente en la licenciatura en Literatura y Lengua Castellana de la Escuela de Idiomas de la UPTC. Démosle un gran aplauso a nuestra siguiente ponente, la doctora Aida Elizabeth Blanco.
A ver. Buenos días a todos. A ver. Les presento a todos un cordial saludo en esta mañana. Es un placer para mí estar nuevamente con el programa de Lenguas Modernas con énfasis en inglés, acompañando también este evento. Aprovecho para agradecer a la doctora Berta Ramos y a todo el equipo organizador del Teachers Moot, porque es mi casa. Entonces, muchas gracias a todos también por su presencia. Yo les voy a compartir hoy un proyecto de investigación en el que hemos estado trabajando desde el año 2021 y específicamente tiene que ver con la difusión y traducción de la literatura brasileña en Colombia y en otros países de habla hispana. El proyecto de investigación Escritoras Ténebra hace parte de la biblioteca digital de narraciones oscuras de cuentos brasileños, que es un proyecto en conjunto con la Universidad do Estado do Rio de Janeiro, específicamente el grupo de estudios do Gótico. Y lo que hemos hecho es crear una estrategia por medio de la traducción para difundir cuentos góticos publicados en el siglo XIX e inicios del siglo XX. Este es un proyecto que nació como parte de las investigaciones de uno de los grupos más importantes de investigación del gótico en Brasil y que pues está orientado en cuanto a cómo podemos rescatar obras que no han sido reeditadas, que han sido poco difundidas o que hacen parte de una tradición de lo gótico. Mi primera invitación es a que ustedes nos visiten en la página web Tenebra, en donde podrán encontrar todo el acervo. El acervo ya cuenta con más de 228 cuentos, más o menos hasta la fecha, y fue lanzado el 31 de octubre de 2021. Entonces, el día de Halloween como una fecha especial para el gótico, y pues ya vamos a cumplir 5 años. La Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia se unió a este proyecto para difundir autoras específicamente hablando de la literatura gótica que no han sido traducidas al español y que tienen poca difusión también en el ámbito brasileño y de habla portuguesa. La biblioteca Tenebra hace parte de un proyecto mucho más amplio que se titula Poéticas del Mal, que hace parte de un proyecto de investigación de varias universidades que trabajan el gótico. Entonces, ustedes ven que es un proyecto en conjunto y es el primer y único acervo de narrativas góticas o narrativas del mal con el que cuenta Brasil. Y pues ya ha tenido otras difusiones en países de habla hispana. Semanalmente la biblioteca publica un cuento o una obra o un estudio académico al respecto de las poéticas del mal. En la página web ustedes van a poder encontrar todos los archivos de manera gratuita. Entonces es entrar, explorar, mirar qué temas a ustedes les interesan del gótico y descargarlos. Son obras que ya no tienen derechos de autor, es decir, que ya hacen parte del dominio público, que ustedes pueden consultar fácilmente en la biblioteca, porque son rescatados, son revisados en periódicos de la época, en revistas de la época o en libros que ya no tienen una circulación, sino que están, por ejemplo, en bibliotecas nacionales, en bibliotecas universitarias y que solo se tiene acceso de manera impresa. Entonces, lo que hacen los curadores y los investigadores del proyecto es visitar estas hemerotecas, estas bibliotecas, para encontrar los textos y hacer todo un proceso de curaduría de los textos. En la página web ustedes también pueden encontrar estudios propios del gótico. Estos son tesis de pregrado, de maestría, de doctorado e incluso de postdoctorado que toman las narrativas góticas como objetos de investigación. Entonces también estos estudios son difundidos en la plataforma, en la página web. Además, ya se cuenta con 2 libros de Tenebra que reúne ya de manera impresa y digital cuentos que han pasado por un proceso de curaduría por los investigadores. ¿Qué es importante para nosotros? Sobre todo, crear lazos culturales por medio de la traducción. Y para nosotros, todo el proceso tiene que ver con un camino de curaduría específico. Entonces, todos los cuentos son disponibilizados en PDF, pero después de haber pasado por un proceso de revisión y actualización ortográfica. Recordemos que estamos hablando del siglo XIX y de inicios del siglo XX. Entonces, todos los cuentos son adaptados al nuevo acuerdo ortográfico de la lengua portuguesa, son disponibilizados en PDF y todos presentan datos específicos de los autores. Desafortunadamente no es posible muchas veces encontrar datos específicos de los autores, incluso no contamos con fotografías. Entonces, este es un proceso de búsqueda y de curaduría constante. También el proyecto Tenebra tiene una línea que tiene que ver con la difusión de los cuentos por medio de las redes sociales. Entonces, este es el Instagram, donde ustedes pueden encontrar todos los cuentos o también pueden inscribirse al newsletter para encontrar semanalmente las noticias de lo que se publica. Hago un poco más acá para poder ver. Ya específicamente hablando de Escritoras Tenebra, antología de cuentos oscuros, Es un proyecto que presenta la traducción de 9 cuentos publicados en la Biblioteca Ténebra, escritos por mujeres en español. Entonces, la traducción lo que hace es una selección de 9 cuentos específicos de escritura femenina para traducirlos, compilarlos y hacer una curaduría también para participar dentro del proyecto y difundir la escritura de mujeres en los países de habla hispana. Nosotros buscamos rescatar y divulgar relatos de terror, misterio y fantasía que hacen parte de la biblioteca. Esto con el fin de visibilizar en Colombia y en otros países de habla hispana el trabajo literario de escritoras que no han tenido difusión, que fueron poco publicadas, pero que hacen parte también de la producción literaria gótica que se publica en la Biblioteca Ténebra. Nos interesa también construir una memoria literaria en la que las autoras tengan una voz y sean reconocidas, esto por medio de la traducción y difusión de su obra. Y también tenemos como objetivo fomentar el interés por la literatura gótica, específicamente de estas 9 autoras que han sido traducidas. Para nosotros la traducción literaria es fundamental porque la literatura brasileña ha sido poco traducida en países de América Latina específicamente. Tenemos más traducciones en Europa, pero sí hay algunos acercamientos, pero en Colombia la difusión de la literatura brasileña ha sido muy escasa, por muchos motivos. El año pasado tuvimos como país invitado a Brasil y sin embargo nos dimos cuenta que la traducción al español de obras contemporáneas es muy difícil, o ha sido muy difícil, y pues más de obras del siglo XIX e inicios del siglo XX. Para nosotros, explorar todo lo siniestro, lo que da miedo, lo que muestra las ansiedades, es una manera también de explorar lo cultural. Y cuando hablamos del gótico brasileño, no hablamos únicamente de un gótico que se caracteriza por generar miedo, sino también por hacer una crítica social. Y esto es complementar la literatura como una manera de hacer crítica social y de estudiarnos como sociedad. Entonces también el gótico es importante por esto. Y al traducir autoras y hacer difusión de su obra, lo que estamos haciendo es crear lazos culturales entre países de habla hispana y Brasil. Brasil hasta hace poco en las instituciones educativas tenía como requisito obligatorio el estudio del español. Esto dejó de ser obligatorio y para los países de habla hispana nunca ha sido obligatorio estudiar portugués o acercarse a la cultura portuguesa, y esto también ha creado un cerco cultural que nosotros pues intentamos resolver, ayudar a resolver por medio del acercamiento, en este caso de la traducción y de acercamiento específicamente a la literatura. Es importante contarles que Brasil cuenta con los mejores acervos de autor de América Latina. Entonces Brasil es uno de los pocos países que cuida, que hace curaduría de los acervos de autor. Por eso es que nosotros podemos rescatar estos textos que en su época tuvieron sí una difusión, pero que quedaron olvidados por algún motivo cultural, y en el caso específico pues la escritura de mujeres fue mucho más relegada que la escritura de autores que sí han sido traducidos, por ejemplo, al español, como Machado de Asís. La única autora de la cual nosotros tenemos más difusión en los países de habla hispana es Clarice Lispector. Pero ella ya, pues, ya a mediados del siglo XX, ¿no? Entonces, también es importante, pues, hacer esa revisión histórica. Como ya les comenté, toda la traducción y la difusión de la literatura brasileña, específicamente en Colombia, ha sido muy limitada, lo que deja de lado la producción de autoras que han contribuido a la construcción de estos imaginarios y también a una crítica social que muchas veces se dio en ámbitos como el periodismo y como la educación. Un aspecto que para nosotros como investigadores y traductores es muy importante es que de los 223 cuentos que son publicados en la biblioteca, que han sido publicados, solo 17 son de autoras. Esto puede tener muchos motivos y uno de ellos es que posiblemente la producción de las autoras en su tiempo no fue muy reconocida, fue ocultada, tal vez se dio por medio de seudónimos, etcétera. Entonces esto es muy diciente, ¿no? Pero es un punto que es importante para nosotros. Todos los cuentos se publicaron entre 1830 y 1947 y nosotros nos preguntamos sobre qué creen que estaban escribiendo las mujeres en esta época, ¿no? Entonces, cuando descubrimos que lo que estaban haciendo era adaptaciones de su contexto social por medio de la literatura gótica, pues nos sorprendemos de los temas que vamos encontrando, que tienen que ver más, como ya lo dije, con una crítica social que se dio pues, en el Brasil decimonónico y en la primera mitad del siglo XX. Las mujeres no estaban hablando de temas que comúnmente, las mujeres escritoras que comúnmente nosotros podemos pensar, como la maternidad, la casa, etcétera, ¿no? No en lo gótico, en otros aspectos sí, pero en lo gótico no. Y vemos que estas autoras, a pesar de ser pocas, que han sido publicadas en el acervo, hacen una elaboración del horror y el misterio para abordar el miedo al otro y a lo natural. Entonces, son varios los temas que nosotros vamos a encontrar. Estos son los 9 cuentos que fueron traducidos para la antología. Vemos que el primero es de 1867 y el último de 1925. Desafortunadamente, no tenemos los datos biográficos ni de autoría de todos los cuentos. ¿Por qué? Porque las autoras, como ya les dije, no eran difundidas, su obra se perdió, etcétera. Entonces, de algunas autoras sí tenemos datos biográficos, de otras no. Y ustedes pueden preguntarse, ¿y si serán de ellas? Sí, es posiblemente que sí, porque un hombre no va a utilizar un seudónimo femenino, ¿sí? De mujer. Entonces, bueno, hay muchas maneras de explicarlo, pero no era un caso que se iba a presentar. ¿Cómo sí podría pasar? Al contrario. Entonces, estos 9 cuentos son los que se compilan en la antología después de un complejo proceso de traducción. Traducir el portugués del siglo XIX y pues, de inicios del siglo XX no es fácil por pues, varias circunstancias lingüísticas, sociales, que hay que revisar para poder hacer la traducción. Nosotros entendemos la traducción literaria principalmente como un proceso de relevancia fundamental para la difusión y valoración crítica de la literatura y para la difusión de la literatura brasileña en Colombia y países de habla hispana. Cuando nosotros hacemos estudios de los currículos, de los planes de área que se dan en las universidades, cuando hablamos de literatura latinoamericana, poquísimas veces hablamos de autores brasileños. Pasamos por uno o por otros y ellos hacen parte de la tradición literaria que tendríamos que revisar. Y pues su presencia es mucho más corta en textos, por ejemplo, para enseñanza de literatura en educación básica. Entonces también es algo que nos impulsa a hacer esta revisión de los cuentos, esta curaduría y esta traducción. Sí tenemos algunos acercamientos a la traducción de la literatura brasileña en Colombia y en países de habla hispana como Perú. Entonces hay varios programas de traducción que dan dinero a editoriales por hacer traducción de obras específicas. Pero desde 2012 más o menos, estas becas han sido reducidas por varios motivos, aunque sí se ha hecho el esfuerzo por traducir. Este es el libro producto de la invitación de Brasil como país invitado a la Feria del Libro de 2012. Que fue publicado y fue difundido de forma gratuita y que solo encontramos en bibliotecas públicas en Colombia. Esta es otra iniciativa de cuentos brasileños, pero la única mujer publicada en esta antología es Clarice Lispector. De resto, son pues autores hombres que hacen parte más de un canon específico. Y Afortunadamente, entre 2023 y 2025 encontramos estas dos traducciones de una de las autoras que va a aparecer en la antología, que es Julia López de Almeida. El libro, La tuerta y otros relatos, fue publicado en 2024 digitalmente y va a ser publicado en 2025 de manera impresa. Y ahí hace parte de un proceso de traducción de una antología de cuentos de la autora. Y El alma de las flores fue publicado en 2024 y lo que muestra son algunos textos más poética, más prosa poética de la autora. Entonces los cuentos que son reunidos en la antología no han sido traducidos hasta el momento, ¿no? Y también hacer toda la caracterización de traducciones, por ejemplo, en Europa, en España pues es un poco más complejo, pero por la indagación en bibliotecas y repositorios de países de habla hispana, específicamente americanos, no aparecen traducciones o no fue posible encontrar traducciones. Acá les presento la portada de la antología, donde reunimos los 9 cuentos traducidos. Pues también es un homenaje a todos los investigadores e investigadoras del área de lo gótico en Brasil y en Colombia, que hacen parte también de los grupos que se han interesado por recuperar estas narrativas. Y nosotros también, como parte del proyecto, hacemos material didáctico para que ustedes conozcan los cuentos traducidos, pero a la vez puedan conocer el acervo y leer los cuentos directamente en portugués. Entonces, en sus redes sociales, en WhatsApp, ustedes posiblemente estén recibiendo esto semanalmente. Entonces, es la primera página del cuento presentado de manera de avance, como en las telenovelas, ¿no? Entonces, para que ustedes puedan leer la primera página y queden así como ansiosos por conocer lo que sigue y visitar el acervo. Entonces, están en PDF, fueron producidos por estudiantes de la licenciatura y del grupo de investigación Si Mañana Despierto y del semillero ISIS. Entonces, todo este es material didáctico creado por los mismos y las mismas estudiantes. Entonces, este es el cuento, son 9 cuentos, entonces por 9 semanas hemos difundido. También, digamos, haciendo una copia de lo que hace la biblioteca original, hacemos una difusión por medio de las redes sociales. Entonces, todo el tiempo estamos publicando en Instagram, en Facebook y en TikTok, ¿no? Todo el material didáctico que surge como complemento a la antología. Esto porque hace parte de la difusión, no es solo traducir y publicar el libro, sino hacer difusión y hacer partícipes a los estudiantes y a las estudiantes del proyecto. Bueno, ya para finalizar, quiero que escuchemos el proyecto en el que estamos trabajando, que es convertir los cuentos en una especie de podcast para poderlos difundir también por plataformas como Spotify y demás. Lo van a escuchar primero en portugués y luego en español.
brilhava broche de ouro com retrato do governador. E o corpo do vestido de borbolhão azul verde parecia explorar, desenhando um busto enorme de uma dona masculina aos casacos largos que estava em casa os cantinhos de cerimônia. Guilherme, entretanto, após um leve aceno que respondia ao chamado dele, continuavam a caminhar juntas, tão entretidas a conversar, que nem davam vendo os outros grupos que passavam às vezes na mesma direção, com um afetuoso bom dia ao lado delas.
Ahora en español, por si no entendieron.
El esfuerzo de los fuegos artificiales se mezclaba con el fuerte taquido de las campanas de la pequeña iglesia blanca en la cima de la colina. Por supuesto, era el final del mes de mayo. Iba a haber una misa cantada, una subasta de ropa, vísperas, un baile en la alcaldía y la gente del lugar estaba almorzando. A las 10:30 de la mañana, el comandante José Domínguez, un importante festero, ya estaba subiendo una empinada ladera pedregosa, bañada por el sol, y cansado, fatigado, deteniéndose a ratos para respirar y decirle a su mujer en una frase ronca: mira aquellas muchachas, Leopoldina, dile que caminen más despacio. Y doña Leopoldina, extendiendo la mirada hacia la parte superior, donde se van moviendo sombrías bajo un solo sombrero para el sol, comenzó a gritar con voz chirriante: Guillermina, Laura, esperen ahí, ¿por qué tanta prisa? El cansancio y el calor le ruborizaban la papada desplegada sobre un amplio puesto de encaje, en el que brillaba el broche dorado con el retrato del comandante, y el cuerpo del vestido de corporán azul oscuro parecía estallar, dibujando un enorme busto de matrona más acostumbrada a los anchos abrigos de precasa que al corsé de la ceremonia. Guillermina y Laura, mientras tanto, después de un leve atendimiento ante el llamado materno, continuaron caminando juntas, tan entretenidas en la conversación que ni siquiera notaban a los otros grupos que iban en la misma dirección y las saludaban con un afectuoso buenos días.
Esa es solo una muestra de lo que estamos haciendo para podcast, pero ustedes pueden encontrar también toda la información en nuestras redes sociales y pues la invitación es a que lean los cuentos, conozcan estas 9 autoras que no habían sido traducidas al español, pero que hacen parte de una tradición de lo gótico. Lo gótico, al estar linear entre lo popular y lo académico, pues está hasta ahora recuperándose como una expresión literaria totalmente válida en cuanto a la producción literaria. Muchísimas gracias.
Tenemos un muy breve espacio para preguntas, quizás una, si alguien quiere participar. De cualquier.
¿Sí? ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta? ¿Nancita? Bueno, ¿por qué no? Aquí mejor. Es por la transmisión.
It's not a question, it's just a kind of reflection about your presentation, Doctor. And I consider that when we are involved in teaching English and involved in learning English, we all the time think that our identity is losing because of the culture that is immersed in it. But what you have presented today is that we have to have our own identity and to be clear that our language abroad is powerful. And people used to love our accent, by the way. So I'm so glad because you have presented that English, okay, is a lingua franca, but it's not a kind of a panacea that we have to bear in mind in terms of pronunciation. So yes, it's just a reflection. So thank you so much for your studies, and I would like if you want to say something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your comment. Yes. So when we, the risk, what is really at stake is the fact that our students walk away with an incomplete view of reality. And that is that their English or that our English, because we are non-native speakers of English, should be inferior, or they might want to think of that as deficient, not as different. And what we have to highlight is different, not deficient. And I think this is, the other day I was reading an article having to do with intelligibility and accent. So you can be intelligible, fully intelligible, without losing your accent, with your own accent. And that is often welcomed. That is often welcomed. We can find examples everywhere, you know. People who sound intelligible. Intelligibility has to do with the fact that people understand what I'm saying. Intelligibility. It's got nothing to do with intelligence, by the way. But it's more about sounding intelligible. So do people know what I mean? You know, what I'm trying to say? Yes, but I still have an accent. It's my Colombian accent. But that doesn't get in the way. That should not get in the way. Yeah. And this is, again, something that we have to encourage our students, our teachers and students to embrace. We have to embrace that. So thank you for your reflection. Thank you for your comment.
Anyone else? Is there any other question? I know. But could you please come over here? The cable is not that long.
So this question is for Aida. So I don't know if you mentioned it about it, but... ok. Entonces, pues no sé si el proceso de traducción, tú lo mencionaste, si es un proceso automatizado o si se hace por parte individual por cada texto. Y si hay un acceso traducido a estos textos, ¿son los que tú estás leyendo en los audios del podcast o ese es el trabajo que tú estás haciendo en tu investigación? Traducir.
Gracias por tu pregunta. En el proceso de traducción no hubo nada automatizado, se hizo por medio de trabajo grupal con hablante nativo, específicamente formado en traducción literaria y en crítica literaria para poderlo entender. También tuvimos el apoyo de filólogos por aquello de el uso de la lengua en el siglo XIX y siglo XX y porque hay muchos matices que para mí como traductora son complicados de entender. Entonces, al mismo tiempo que se hace la curaduría para actualizar los textos a la nueva norma de la nueva ortografía del portugués, se hace también entonces la revisión en la traducción. Y muchas veces que funcionan cosas que funcionan en el portugués, pues no nos funcionan en el español. Algo muy difícil fue los falsos amigos, los falsos cognados, porque en el portugués del siglo XIX nos funcionaban. En el actual no. Entonces fue un proceso sobre todo de filología y también de trabajo conjunto. Todos los cuentos ya traducidos fueron leídos por hablantes de español. Entonces tuvimos el aporte de los estudiantes del semillero, de estudiantes también brasileños que hablan o estudian el español, de hablantes bilingües, tanto por conocimiento de la lengua, por influencia paterna o materna. Entonces fue todo un proceso de lectura. En algunos momentos nos tocó utilizar algunos programas de traducción para poder entender los falsos cognados, o sea, cuando no los entendíamos ninguno. Entonces, bueno, fue un proceso. Hasta el momento, ustedes solo van a poder encontrar los cuentos de manera digital en las redes sociales, o sea, hasta ahí vamos. Digamos, el siguiente paso es la publicación y la difusión de la antología. Pero si ustedes quieren tener acceso a los cuentos desde ya, pues los pueden solicitar por medio del semillero de investigación para tener acceso a este cuento. Vale también el momento para agradecer a todos los profesores del grupo de estudios Dugóchico, porque fueron ellos los que nos permitieron trabajar en el proceso de traducción. Digamos que en Colombia solo contamos con una licenciatura que enseña portugués como lengua de énfasis y ninguna maestría ni ningún doctorado trabaja el portugués. Entonces también es una dificultad que nosotros tenemos al momento de traducir en Colombia porque no contamos con apoyo académico de otros investigadores. El trabajo con las editoriales es un poco más complejo, entonces tampoco tuvimos acceso a, por ejemplo, a programas específicos de traducción. Entonces, el proceso sí fue mucho más de trabajo académico con investigadores y traductores. Y algo importante también fue el apoyo del Ministerio de Cultura de Brasil, porque varios investigadores del Ministerio de Cultura de Brasil leyeron los textos, los conocieron y pues también nos están ayudando con la difusión en Brasil, porque el libro o el material didáctico no se puede quedar solo acá, sino que tiene que tener esa doble intención. Creo que con eso respondí tu pregunta. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigada, você sabe que eu não falo inglês.
Because of the time, we're going to stop over here. How about if we stretch a little bit? We're going to go with an active pause. Outside, you will find some snacks. So you can go outside, grab something for you to drink and eat. And we will be waiting for you in 5 minutes for our next plenary session.
developments. It was developed by PhD Thelma Jimenez, who joins us from Universidade Estadual de Londrina, in Brazil. PhD Thelma Jimenez, Senior Professor at Universidade Estadual de Londrina. Postgraduate program in Language Studies. She holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics from Lancaster University, UK. Her current research interests are in the areas of English as a global language, internationalization of higher education, and language policies. She is a researcher funded by CNPq, Brazilian Science and Technology Agency, and has more than 200 publications in refereed journals, book chapters, and conference proceedings. Let's give a warm applause to Dr. Thelma.
Hola, buenos días. Muchas gracias por la presentación. I don't speak Spanish. I'm going to be speaking in English. And I'd like to start by saying I'm very happy and honored to be part of this event, and very thankful to Professor John Mosquera, who invited me to be here with you virtually, and I hope next time in person. Thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations to the organizers. I'm also happy because I'm going to speak after Dr. Macias, who already addressed some of the issues I'll be talking about. I think the title I gave when he invited me was too ambitious. I think it's quite ambitious actually to talk about English as a lingua franca in Latin America, because of course I'm be speaking more from a Brazilian perspective and the little I know about what else is being done in Latin America to discuss the status of English in the world today and how that has impacted research and teacher education and materials writing and assessment procedures. So this is going to be more my own perspective and my own knowledge, limited knowledge so far about what's going on in our continent. But I hope that we will feel inspired to expand our partnerships and our collaborations so that we develop a more consolidated approach to English from our Latin America perspective. So I'm going to start by presenting, first of all, the 4 topics that I thought we could address here, and I'll try to go quickly through them because I hope we'll have time for questions at the end. I know it will be your lunchtime, and I hope that we can have some time before you move on. So first, a very brief overview of ELT in Latin America from a policy perspective, and then English as a lingua franca as a concept. Professor Macias has already introduced that as part of the global English paradigm, but I see some differences between world Englishes and English as a lingua franca, and I'll try to make these distinctions clear as I move on. Also focusing on ELF in Brazil and some of the initiatives we have had so far here for the introduction of these perspective in our school system. Also talk a little bit about challenges and future developments, and I hope you can join me in presenting your own views on this. So as ELF in Latin America, we all know that English language teaching and learning in Latin America is always being portrayed as English as a foreign language, especially at policy level. And that description invites us to think that as a foreign language, we're mainly thinking of preparing learners to use English and interact with native speakers. So native speakerism is a very strong ideology that has been influencing a lot of the policies and practices in our countries. But that terminology also coexists with other conceptualizations such as English as an additional language, English as a global language or international language, and even world Englishes. And some of my colleague, Hajago Palam, for instance, prefers to use world English, singular, for referring to what some researchers have been trying to establish as a paradigm known as English as a lingua franca that shares many of the features of world Englishes and these other paradigms that could be part of this global English paradigm. So in terms of the continent, we have many countries that are introducing policies to favor English in the school curriculum and in many educational systems, regardless of the fact that we are multilingual countries. So English is being more and more adopted as the only language that deserves policy attention. And we were seeing an expansion of this trend, both in terms of introducing English very early in education, like primary level, and also introducing English as a medium of instruction in higher education. So we're seeing a very quick expansion of this so-called market of English. And we need to be aware that this expansion is provoking a lot of changes in terms of curriculum design, teaching materials, and recommendations for teachers in schools. And if we look at the global rankings of English as a language that's used by people in many different countries, according to this survey that is carried out by English First, this is the 2024 results, for instance, that play Colombia and Brazil at the low proficiency level. So countries in Latin America in general have been seen as countries that somehow need to develop better proficiency in English, and this has been associated with the discourses of economic development. And so the governments have been very keen on introducing policies to favor English and to make it a language that's widely spoken by the population, especially seeing this as a strategy to attract investment and develop prosperity. So there are questions to be asked about this trend and also how that is reflected in relation to other languages that could be also being offered in the school systems. So we have, for instance, two main programs like Colombia Bilingüe and in Chile, Inglés Abre Puertas, that are based on benchmarking defined by especially Eurocentric views, and that is reflected, for instance, in the adoption of the CFR as the standard to be against which all the proficiency levels are to be measured. And that's, again, is a big problem. So what these policies have been doing in terms of reinforcing English is leaving aside discussions about what is English or what counts as English. And so we can ask the question, can an ELF perspective inform those fallacies and classroom practices, given the pressure to adopt these standards and the conversions of these standards? So what is English as a lingua franca? There are many interpretations of what this is. The literature is varied in terms of how this can be defined. My friends Denise de Figueiredo and Siqueira published in 2021 description that places at least three possibilities for interpreting English as a lingua franca. It could be a context of language use, in which we understand the language through which two or more people who come from different lingua-cultural backgrounds communicate. These interactions may imply only non-native speakers or non-native speakers and native speakers. It can also be seen as a function of the language when it's not a new variety of the language. So English as a lingua franca is not a variety. For this reason, it wouldn't be placed under the World English's paradigm. But the ways in which English is adopted and appropriated by people in different parts of the world. It's also seen as a research paradigm, with, from the point of view of the sociolinguistics of globalization, that has approached English from a different epistemological point of view. So it's trying to find a niche in research for those scholars who are interested in understanding how English is used in multilingual contexts and within multilingualism. I also added here a pedagogical perspective, because this is mainly the way that Brazilians have been approaching ELF, thinking of how these ideas, these more theoretical ideas, can be incorporated into teaching and learning. And so it could be seen also that ELF as a pedagogical perspective is teaching and learning that is self-informed, that's rooted in local understandings, and that acknowledges the power of language in society. So it takes a more critical view to English language teaching. So ELF is considered a part of a repertoire of semantic resources used in communication. So it's not just about the English language per se. It's not based on assumptions that we share linguistic norms, meaning-making norms, or cultural norms. And it doesn't depend on the notion of standards. So actually it rejects the notion of standards because it's considered a fluid use of the language that emerges from the interactions as people choose to adopt English as a common medium of communication. And there may be, as I said, native speakers or non-native speakers in the interaction, and they are always co-constructing the language as they try to communicate. So it changes native speakerism. That means that it requires conceptual adjustments to how we understand language and how we understand English. Proposes the development of intercultural awareness. So one of the key objectives of learning English would be to develop of this competence or of this awareness, and not draw on cultural stereotyping, which is very common in English language teaching. It focuses on how meaning co-constructed in interaction and how people actually use the language. And also it assesses successful communication, not necessarily adherence to standard English norms. So that's, in a nutshell, some of the definitions and some of the key elements of an ELF perspective or on language and English in particular. So ELF in Latin America means that the international literature makes very little reference to all these reflections that are being produced in Latin America. And also they tend to take a neutral stance towards ELF. And I think in our experience, it's very important to question some of the tenets that have been guiding ELT and how that has contributed or not to overcoming some of the hierarchization of speakers that is especially reinforced by the adoption of American English or British English as the only valid ways of using English. So in Latin America, we have a greater emphasis on critical and political nature of English in our scholarship, and more recently, informed by these decolonial perspectives, we are embracing the notion of epistemic pluralism and the coexistence of different and competing epistemologies, different ways of thinking about English that is more rooted in our local experiences. So it's also a way of addressing ELF from a research perspective that tries to contribute to the international dialogue on this. In last year, Sonia Moran-Paranero and colleagues published a collection with chapters focusing on English in Latin America, and they said that it would be completely erroneous to suggest that problematization of English had not been voiced in Latin America, because this is what one of Jenkins' initial reviews of the literature mentioned, that Latin America didn't have much scholarship about ELF. And Moran-Paranero and her colleagues challenged that by saying that the literature on English language in this region has taken linguistic imperialism and world English perspectives to examine the roles, functions, and uses of English. And these disciplines have offered valuable insights on the pedagogy of ELT, issues of power, inequality, and discrimination between speakers, and the need to recognize the legitimacy of non-native emerging varieties. So although policies in our countries have been stressing an EFL perspective on their programs and strategies, we have seen a lot of research and a lot of initiatives in teacher education, for instance, to about who's speaking to whom and why some English forms of English are considered superior than others, and why some people feel ashamed of speaking in English, and things that are usually left out of all these excerpts and examples of language use when we're dealing with EFL. ELF, on the other hand, makes an ethical commitment to discuss how language, politics, and power are intertwined. And also, EFL focuses on monolingualism, while ELF adopts translingualism or translanguaging as a valid practice in language learning. So while we have all these discussions at the research level among academics, we also had a recent change in our national curriculum that at the same time, it introduced English as the only language to be taught in the school system. Before that, we had multilingualism as the option. So any language could be part of the curriculum. And in fact, we had a law that established that Spanish would be compulsory at high school level. That changed in 2017 when the first document was introduced, and that change in the law made it compulsory to learn English from grade 6 on. That also caused an effect at lower levels, because now many municipalities are introducing English in their curriculum. So this national curriculum that came alongside with the law established that the curriculum would be competence-based. Of course, the document went through several revisions, and the final version was the result of very intense negotiations in a moment that the country was going through a political instability with the impeachment of our president. And there was an indication in this curriculum that it would fall within the neoliberal mindset, and that English matched perfectly to that, because, of course, English is seen as the language that is very important for globalization and economic development, as all these other bilingual programs or programs that I mentioned earlier were trying to stress out. So English in this new curriculum is national guidelines, is seen as part of the interdisciplinary area of languages. So it's together with Portuguese, English, arts, and physical education. States had to produce more detailed documents, but in general, they just copied and pasted what was in the national curriculum document. And it focuses on multiliteracies and interculturality as to implications of endorsing English as a lingua franca. And the document explicitly says that it endorses English as a lingua franca. And it explains why in this document. Treating English as a lingua franca delinks it from a particular territory. So we have to think of English in terms of their users rather than countries, and consequently from typical cultural practices of specific communities, thus legitimizing the uses of English in local contexts. This understanding favors language education for interculturality, which is the recognition of and respect for differences and for understanding how they are produced in various social practices. What also favors critical reflection on different ways of seeing, analyzing the world, others, and oneself. So many people were very happy with the unofficial document would actually endorse English as a lingua franca, because that meant we could start moving away from the more traditional ways of teaching English in the schools. But of course, you can imagine there are many, many challenges in doing that, because we have been educated under this English as a foreign language paradigm, and language ideologies have been very strong in making us believe that unless we can use perfect English, according to this idealized native speaker, we are not entitled, we're not legitimate users of the language. So the implications for the curriculum was that we need to reshape the learning objectives. And so the idea was not to communicate with native speakers, but to develop awareness about the various ways in which speakers of English interact in multilingual settings. So that redefining the purposes of learning English. Also awareness raising about the political and social aspects of language use. So for instance, introducing global issues as part of this education and bringing more controversial or political themes to the conversation, not just, these sanitized dialogues that mostly common in textbooks. Destabilization of deep-seated beliefs about good English, so challenging ideologies about what good English is. Also, we had to think about the creation and adaptation of teaching materials and textbooks. We had to think about exposure to real-life language use beyond American or British English, and of course, we have now with internet many possibilities of doing so, but of course that requires a lot of time from teachers as well. Translanguaging as a learning strategy was something that needed to be considered as well. And assessment focused more on the achievement of communicative purposes rather than whether they followed the norms that have been established by grammarians. So we have some convergence here in terms of what is being done in Colombia. And I was very glad to read a paper that is already it's going to appear soon in the How magazine with colleagues, Professor Moscara and his colleagues. And they say also something similar along those lines, that EOT practitioners and interested in potentially addressing ELF and global English in their classroom environments could also undertake some of these actions. And they propose, for instance, decentering the native speaker norms by encouraging critical discussions on English ownership, incorporating multilingual resources to challenge linguistic discrimination, promote translanguaging and multilingual practices, use assessment practices that value diversity in terms of accents of English, varieties in general, and introduce global perspectives in EOT materials, in addition to fostering connections with global communities. So creating conditions for people to interact with other speakers who are not necessarily native speakers, to see how they experience this and what kind of reflections that generates. So very briefly about some of the experiences in Brazil in trying to incorporate this perspective into our teacher education initiatives. We have many, many opportunities right now, and you can imagine that after being endorsed by an official national curriculum document, many people try to first of all, learn more about what ELF is and how that could be translated into classroom practices. And of course, teacher education plays a very, very important role in that. So in publication in 2015, before the publication of the official national curriculum, because we were already addressing issues of English as a global language and English as a lingua franca in our teacher education program. So when the document finally endorsed it, it was the result of many, many studies, many initiatives, and many publications that had already been produced at the time. So in this chapter that we published in this book, Current Perspective on Pedagogy for English as a Lingua Franca, we introduced some basic references on English as a global language in this initial teacher education course, which I think is similar to the context that Professor Macias mentioned in relation to Colombia. Final year students or third year students in their licenciatura in English. Okay, 5 minutes. So in this case here, we have discussed the experience we had, and also we asked the students to analyze resources, and we produced a checklist with the features that we thought would be characterized in ELF. So the students had to analyze materials in terms of some of the questions that we posed there. So this reference is going to be with the slides, and I'm going to make these slides available through Professor Mosquera. So if you're interested, you can get a copy of that. So another opportunity is now we are offering this semester is this online course offered on Google Classroom. We already have about 200 participants, and that's part of the in-service teacher education, because many teachers in the schools are now trying to understand how they can implement this perspective into their teaching. Also, we have experiences of materials writers. We have a national textbook program, and these authors produced a book called Way to English for Brazilian Learners of English, in which they adopted an English as a lingua franca perspective. And these are some examples of what they did to materialize, so to speak, this perspective. Also, in terms of assessment, which is the most difficult part of this, is how can we incorporate an ELF perspective into assessment? And we have a paper that has just been published by Camila House in the dossier on ELF in Latin America, and Minarbolis y Soma, a journal from Chile, in which she explains what she sees as a way of bringing assessment in line with an ELF approach. So this is what she says. So it would involve the promotional ways to support learners in positioning themselves as legitimate users of the language, rather than criticizing or trying to correct them for not adopting a standard English pronunciation or practice. Here are also some of the references of publications that we reported on our experiences on teacher education. And now very briefly about what I see as challenges is, for instance, the official endorsement of an ELF-informed curriculum may not be enough to foster change in classroom practices, because we have to consider, for instance, the role of textbooks and testing in also having a washback effect on teaching. So a document may not be enough, and we need to be aware of that. Teacher development programs needed to consider policy constraints and beliefs and attitudes, language ideologies, in order to have a positive impact. In that sense, we could foster more communities of practice in which teachers and prospective teachers can come together to discuss ways of implementing such an approach. And also, parents, of course, and learners need to be aware of the potential benefits of ELF to overcome their common sense views. Also, I think we need to be more aware of the constraints and also the deconstruction of language ideologies that reproduce colonial views that are especially encapsulated in EFL. may not be one of our biggest challenges. ELF may be seen as a convenient concept as well to reinforce the hegemony of the English language and its ties with the current stage of capitalism. And also, we need to expand our theoretical lenses to examine the role of English in reproducing or producing inequalities, if our interest lies in the potential of the ELF concept to foster social justice. And again, I'm trying to emphasize this as a critical perspective that is needed, and a bit of caution in promoting ELF as if it could be a solution to all of our problems. I also see a lot of promise in research in Latin America, and I'm glad we're having an opportunity to interact now, because this is something that we perhaps need to do more often, to encourage more dialogue among ourselves, and to give visibility to the research that's being done in Latin America. Because, for instance, from 2011, when Jenkins, Kogo, and Dewey said we had very little in terms of Latin American scholarship, we moved on to having the first ELF conference in Latin America in Medellin in 2019. And last year, we had the book, especially about Latin America, organized by Moran and colleagues. And this year, we just produced the thematic dossier on arbores y rizomas, and then where I had the chance to meet Professor Mosquera. So thank you very much. These are some of the references, and this is just a picture of my university in Londrina, and these are my contact email. Thank you. Sorry, this had to be rushed, and I know I brought a lot of ideas to the table, but I hope we have 2 minutes for questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Professor Telma. It was actually a really enlightening talk. But now we have some time for questions. I don't know if you have a question for Professor Jimenez. Yes, sorry.
Thank you. A little bit closer. Okay. Thank you very much. It's not a question, it's just a reflection. Thank you very much for the insights, and also to Professor Macias. And I think something very important is that, to mention or to highlight, is that sometimes the expectations we have as students and pre-service teachers of the language is to come and learn about English and materials and kind of tip-oriented Congress. And I am very glad to see that there is a different lens, because I have always been worried as a professor, being here almost 20 years, about this instrumental way sometimes that we look at languages. So I appreciate the conversation about the deconstruction of the notion of native speakerism, because our context is not only you students, future colleagues, being proficient in the language, but what that implies when you are agents of teaching the language in different contexts. And that might imply having a positioning. Remembering, for example, that this fallacy of the native speakerism started with probably Pennycook in the early 200s, 2000s. And how is it that, and I do it because in the tutoring sessions, you teachers, future colleagues, are worried about your accent all the time. So you want tutors with Canadian accent, you being Colombian and me being Colombian, because they believe Canadian is probably is going to give them, probably more opportunities. And this is the fallacy of the native speakerism. And I'm very glad to hear that the agenda in Latin America is decolonial, and to remember that this concept of native speakerism is rooted in inequity, is rooted in racialization and power and the hierarchy of those things. So more than the language per se is how is it that we as teachers enact what we do, respecting and giving also priority to what's the role of English in our lives as English teachers in Latin American context. And when I was in Great Britain for a year and a half, I just had the chance to talk to what they would call a native speaker once in 1 year and a half. I'm probably having a lot of problems in communication, but we don't know what is called native speakers, but immigrants that are also non-native speakers, pretending not understanding a non-native speaker. That was me. So that's the reflection I wanted to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jimenez, again for joining us in this talk. We'll continue with the next plenary. Let's give her a final round of applause for Professor Telma Jimenez. Okay, so continuing with our agenda, we're gonna have the first in-person panel. What about? We have the book launching of the book titled Revisiting Language Teaching, Key Elements for Pre-Service EFL Teacher, created by M.A. Jair Aguirre González and M.A. Ilva Janet Rodríguez Tamayo from Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia. Jair Aguirre Morales is a professor at Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia in Tunja, Boyacá. He holds an MA in English Didactics from Universidad de Caldas. He belongs to the research group TONG. He currently teaches at the School of Languages at UPTC. He was an ESL teacher in North Carolina and a Spanish language teacher in Virginia, USA. M.A. Ilva Janet Tamayo Rodríguez, Colombian professor at Universidad Pedagógica y Tecnológica de Colombia, UPTC, in Tunja, Boyacá. She holds an M.A. in Applied Linguistics for the Teaching of English from Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas. She belongs to the research group AVE. She currently teaches at the School of Languages and the M.A. in Language Teaching program at the UPTC. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists.
Hello, thank you very much for staying until this time. I know you might be tired, but well, this is like the last presentation in the morning, so I hope you can stay. And it's going to be a panel in which we are going to talk a little bit about a book that has been published by the editorial house of our university, UPTC. So, as this is a panel, I'm going to be asking questions to the participants here. So again, thank you very much, Professor Jair Aguirre and Professor Ilva Janet Rodríguez Tamayo, who are the authors of a book that was recently published by the editorial house at UPTC, and it is called Revisiting English Language Teaching, Key Elements for Pre-Service Teachers. An important aspect of this textbook is that you don't need to pay for it. So you just go to Catálogo Editorial UPTC and you just have it. Okay, so, and there are many textbooks as part of our catalog that you just need to download and then you can have access to them for free. Okay, so let's start this dialogue. So let's start this dialogue with this question. If you notice, the title of this textbook is Revisiting English Language Teaching, Key Elements for Pre-Service Teachers. So the first question I would like to ask you both is how or why did you choose this title? Why is it that it is called Revisiting? What does it imply?
Okay, good morning to everyone. Well, this title about revisiting, it has to do because when teaching, there's a lot of new things, but there's a lot of things that are not new at all, okay? So every time we teach any topic that we as teachers do, probably we ask ourselves, this is the second time, the third time, the first time, the 20th time to teach that specific topic, and probably not because we have taught that specific topic for the 10th time is going to be easy. So always as teachers, we need to revisit what we have to teach every day. Also, about revisiting, it has to do with the epistemological part in which this book is based. Basically, from a philosophical point of view, well, this book is not about philosophy, but it has some fundamentals in epistemology based on Heidegger. And Heidegger is a German philosopher which mentions that we need to go back to the things, like back to the things themselves. It's a kind of confusing concept, but if we translate that into Spanish, it is like ir a las cosas mismas. It is like going into the basis. Related about what Heidegger mentions, it is like less theory, more practice, and more reflection. That is basically what Heidegger mentions. That is basically what he says, or that we interpret as going back to the things themselves, okay? So every single part, okay, in this book, it is like revisit all the topics, but with that reflection, okay? So that's why it is the title, that's why we chose the title for this book, Revisiting Language Teaching.
Thank you very much. So you have already mentioned some of the epistemological backgrounds of the textbook, and I think that's something important for us to talk about, because sometimes we tend to think that only if it is a research book, it has an epistemological background. But this is a textbook, and there are many epistemological aspects behind the textbook. So thank you very much for sharing that part. And Professor Ilva, who is this book intended for? Who is the audience of this book?
Well, good morning to you all, and thank you for coming. Well, mainly the book is intended for students who are doing their final practicum, so pre-service teachers. However, I think that it is very useful to those professors in service and for us as professor of a languages program. So that is like the main audience, that is the book.
Okay, something that I found interesting also is that it can be used at any context, because there are many topics that we as EFL teachers share, and there are many experiences, and our experiences are very similar. Something else that you can find in this textbook is like a very or an aspect quite related to the territories and ruralities, and I think that is something important that we can all share with our students. Professor Aguirre, could you please tell us a little bit about the structure of the textbook? How is it organized?
Okay. Well, the book is organized. Well, can we move into the content a little bit? So then I will be mentioning a little bit of the organization of the book. So it is divided into chapters that we don't call chapters, that we called their elements, okay? And each element has some themes or topics that we address or that we talk, and we propose some exercises in that part. But it is also organized also in that epistemological part based on communication. And there is another philosopher, like contemporary philosopher, that is called Byung-Chul Han, who talks about the crisis of the narration, who retakes another philosopher that is Benjamin from the beginning of last century. And the problem of narration and communication is what Dr. Macias mentioned this morning. Okay, so first, nowadays we don't communicate too much. And second, when we try to communicate, we have problems. All right. So what we try to do in each of the parts in there, it is just to take a topic, have some questions there too for the students, for the teachers, and to start to reflect. Okay. And based on that reflection, students construct themselves some ideas about that topic. And then they read, okay, about whatever the topic is, and there are some exercises based or around on that topic and based on the experience as English learners. Okay, that is one part of the structure. The second part of the structure, it has to do with the communication. So this is a book that is not intended for like you take the book and then you solve the exercises. It's not a textbook like that way. You need somebody to work with, to start communication, to start building concepts, and to start assimilating all those concepts that are proposed there, but then you're going to create your own concept. Your own concept about, for example, negotiating the EFL curriculum. Okay, your own concept about homework assignment in EFL. Your own concept about, for example, working with the community in EFL classrooms. All right. It is because sometimes as English teachers, we think that the only community that we have to work with are our students in the classrooms. But the community has a lot of extensions in there.
Before just telling you what you're going to find in each one of the elements, I just want to add something, and it is that you are going to find in each one of the chapters different situations. And those situations most of them are real, and they were based on our experiences as professors here in the School of Languages, also as professors in different schools, as advisors of practicums, but also about our sons' experiences in the schools. So you know that Professor Bertica, Professor Jair, and Professor Ilva, we have 3 sons, and as they were just in the school, so we shared many of their experiences, and they are just, you're gonna find some of them in the book. Well, so additionally to what Professor Jair has mentioned, I just want to tell you that the presentation of this book is similar to the one that we had the last year with the book addressing the basics of EFL classrooms. So it is divided into 8 elements. And in the first one, you are gonna find, my eyes, the first one. Okay, so in the first one, you are gonna find parental and family involvement in EFL classroom. In the second one, how pre-service teachers, how in-service teachers may work with the community. Number 3, how it is possible to negotiate with the curriculum. Then we move to element number 4, and the reader is gonna find things related to the homework assignments in EFL. Number 5, assessment in EFL classroom. Chapters number 6 and number 7 are deal with complexities in the classroom. And finally, meeting an EFL classroom. At the end, you are going to find some conclusions, and after that, we have added a section where you're going to find additional links just for expanding the knowledge that you are going to see or that you're going to find in each one of the elements. So that is like the difference with the last book, the ones that we published last year.
Okay, thank you very much. So talking about the experience of writing the book, did you learn anything unexpected while writing this textbook, something that you want to share with us?
I was just thinking these days about that, and maybe it's not a kind of learning, but it was just a reflection that we had the chance to do in one of our journeys, and is the importance of being working in these academic activities. Because many of the time we are, as professors of the university, we are just working on administrative tasks, and we don't have enough time to work on this kind of activities. You cannot imagine how much we enjoyed our journeys, just listening to each other, just negotiating some of our activities, just maybe trying to understand what one of the authors proposes, and maybe it was not totally clear. So we learned how to listen and how to accept, for example, other corrections, so that it is something that commonly we don't do in our schools or in our academic activities, because we are just doing different tasks. So maybe that was what I learned.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, well, I would like to expand a little bit more about it. Every time we write, we learn something, okay? And obviously, there was a previous experience. Last year also we published a textbook. And not because we have that experience, we have learned everything, okay? So the more we write, like the more obstacles we have to overcome. And that is something that we learned. Like, okay, like we're going to go like in this second endeavor, and it's going to be easy or easier. And well, it's going to be easier in some parts, but there are some problems to solve in the middle of the way. That is something that we have to learn. The problems are solved in the way, and once that all those problems are solved, so then we have like a textbook that we can to launch here today.
Okay, thank you very much. Could you please tell us a little bit about any chapter that you like the most, or that you feel more identified with?
Well, I think that I love each one of them, because I think that we worked with responsibility, with passion, and we were very dedicated to each one of the elements. But if I have to select, I select, first of all, the complexities that we and you as pre-service teachers, you may find in the classroom. Well, and especially there is one section that is dedicated to gifted students. So commonly when we think about classroom complexities, just we think about like possible discipline problems, or maybe classroom management. But also here we have included another kind of population, and it is gifted students. So those students who are very talented, so how can we work with them in our classrooms? Yeah, so because it is necessary that we think also about them. And of course, the chapter or the element that I enjoy the most is the last one, and it is meeting an EFL classroom. And this is a topic that I have been working during the last semesters with my students of didactics ones. And I like it because it is very important that in pre-service teachers be aware of the importance of a first class, and the importance of the first impression that you have to leave in your students. Well, and you cannot imagine the amount of ideas that come to their minds. There is one section, there is one activity that is where the reader is asked to draw the impression that they want to leave in their students in the first class and throughout the course. And I just remember, okay, I remember many of them, but I just have one. And if I am not wrong, it was designed by Valentina Medellin. And she wrote a sky with a lot of stars. And just what she wanted was that her students be aware of their importance in our world and that each one of them has their own light. Yeah. So I expect that actually that now she's going to be graduated like in 3 months. Maybe she can accomplish that dream.
Thank you, Professor Gilbert. As I am also one of the authors, I am also going to mention the chapter or the part I like the most about the textbook, and it is the first one, which is about parents' involvement. As Professor Ilva mentioned, I am also a mother, and I have faced what it means to try to be part of the school, but then as a parent you feel that you don't belong. So in this part, which is families and schools, I like this part a lot because what we tried to do was to provide pre-service teachers with ideas of how to incorporate parents and how to try to make parents feel important and part of the education of their kids. And we try not to pay attention to the fact that they know the language or they don't know the language, but how even without knowing English, we as parents, or knowing French or German or any language, we can also be part of the educational part of our kids. So I think that I like this part a lot because that was part of my life as a mother. So what you're going to find there is part of my experience and the experience that, well, Elvita didn't face that experience that much, but we both faced that experience. So that's why this part is quite important for, at least, for me. Professor Aguirre.
Okay. Well, I like the whole book, right? But the one that I like the most, it is element number 4. Could you please move to there? Homework assignment in EFL. And why I like this part? It is because usually we English teachers, we don't think much about homework. We just assign homework. And basically, that homework is assigned in the last minute during the classroom. And we teachers, we make a really high impact or bad impact into our students when we assign homework in the last minute. Because it means basically that we didn't plan the homework. All right? So just think about your professor, your teachers, okay? And sometimes those professors, teachers, they think, hey, this is the topic that we're going to cover today. This is the objective or the purpose of this lesson today, and pay attention to the homework, okay? And usually in a 2-hour session class, I mean, if we want our students to do the homework, at least we need to devote like half an hour or 20 minutes about explaining and what we expect about the homework. Now, let's try to think about like when we assign homework and then we receive homework and that is not what we expected. Whose fault is that? It's our fault. It's not the student's fault. It's our fault as teachers. Okay? So could you please move a little bit to the beginning? Next part. Okay, this one. So we came up with a circle, okay? Like a homework assignment has like a movement. You can start wherever you want to start, okay? Wherever you want to initiate, thinking about that homework that you are going to assign. For example, English teachers, we just think about, okay, just learn the verb to be, the simple past of this, the passive voice about that. We never think about the place. We never think about the student. We never think about the outcome, okay? So we need to think about those things. And there are other 3 things that we need to think about. Let's move, Mr. Could you please move next part? Next. This one here, something very important to plan. we as teachers, we need to think about the effort students are going to put on homework, the time that they are going to devote, and the frequency that we're going to assign in homework. That's why we cannot assign homework into the last minute of the class or of the lesson. That's right. Now, we need to plan homework as teachers. As we plan any other lesson, we need to plan homework assignments too. Could you please move to the next part? Think about this. Very often, or not very often, we don't think about the impact we make in our students and the impact we make on the parents of our students when we assign homework. Think about this. We are teaching English to little kids, 3rd grade, 4th grade, or 5th grade, or in a high school. Those kids in 3rd grade, they want to do homework. Parents, probably they want to help. Most families, they don't know English. They have a big problem. They come frustrated. Because they are frustrated, the students and the parents, they have issues at home. They have problems at home. And that's why the students come to our class not very well motivated. Just because we didn't provide the correct instructions for homework. Or probably the correct instructions, but a very long, frustrating homework to do. Okay? So that's something that we need to rethink. All right? And we have planned or put there some ideas like how to rethink or how to think about those issues.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your insights. We, of course, invite all the audience to take a look at the book. And now I'm going to switch into Spanish just to let you know how you can access the catalog of the UPTC. Este libro, como muchos otros libros que ustedes pueden encontrar en el catálogo de la editorial de la UPTC, ustedes solamente googlean catálogo editorial UPTC y una vez estén allí van a encontrar que tenemos una serie, todas las revistas nuestras, como la mayoría de las revistas en Colombia, son de acceso abierto. Y también van a encontrar que muchos de nuestros libros tienen precio, pero muchos otros libros aparecen allí en el catálogo editorial. Bájalo un poquito, Germán, por favor. Si ustedes ven, hay unos que dicen ebook y está el precio, cuánto cuesta impreso, pero también hay uno como este que se llama Introducción al Cálculo que dice que es gratuito. Si nosotros bajamos más, hay unos de Voces de las Mujeres, etcétera, etcétera. Entre estos libros que son gratuitos está el que acaban de presentar los profesores, el que vamos a presentar mañana también es un libro que va a ser gratuito. Así que lo único que ustedes tendrían, acá está lo único que ustedes tendrían que hacer es entrar al catálogo, darle clic, bajarlo y utilizarlo en todo lo que lo puedan necesitar. El libro que presentamos mañana también es así, en el catálogo editorial. Después de que los libros tienen 3 años de uso o 4 años de uso, los dejamos en acceso abierto para toda la comunidad. Allí van a encontrar de todas las áreas que tenemos en la UPTC, es decir, de educación, medicina, ingeniería, arquitectura, etcétera, 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 etcétera. Así que los invitamos a que den una mirada y bajen, descarguen todos los libros que ustedes quieran descargar que están libres para libre acceso. Muchas gracias a nuestros autores por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Mañana tendremos otro prelanzamiento del libro porque los lanzamientos oficiales de estos libros los hacemos en la Feria del Libro de Bogotá durante la Feria del Libro del 2026. A todos ustedes agradecerles que nos hayan acompañado hasta esta hora y esperarlos a las 2 de la tarde que tenemos una charla muy interesante, sobre todo para quienes estén interesados en aplicar para un programa para irse al exterior y cómo funciona, qué les paga el programa, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Así que los esperamos a las 2 de la tarde. Que tengan un feliz almuerzo.